don't know where Francesco is. Carlos? Carlos? Okay, let's see if we can get in our seats and get back to this process.
Hi, Francesca. Nice to see you.
Hi, dear. How are you? So we have 10 minutes. Did you bring any slides?
No.
No, good. Oh, thank goodness. So the only person that has slides is Thorhild. And I think you were here for the last session?
No.
No. Okay, don't go first then. Okay. Jeremy, why don't you go first? Okay, let's do Jeremy. Okay, I think we really actually need to get started. So let's just, if you see anybody in the hall, can you call them in? Hello? Can you call people in? Well, at what point do we just begin?
I guess in a couple of minutes because otherwise more people will get out and people get in.
Yeah. We'll just begin. Okay, so we're just going to begin and let people come. Enough is enough. I think that they might start coming if they hear me start blabbling. So I could tell you a story. I guess the interesting set of interlinking issues here keeps coming back to something that Ian Dunlop continues to bring up, which is that somehow we have to think about all of these very complex things while we're in a state of emergency. And unfortunately, for a lot of us that live in comfortable lives, that emergency isn't readily apparent. It isn't readily felt. There's still people in restaurants. There's still people drinking coffee in the hall. And I was with a group of Native American people this year, and one of them made this comment that sort of stuck with me around thinking about what it means to think about systems change and how systems change is such a difficult thing to imagine. When we talk about how are we going to live differently, it's so easy to say those words. Everything is interconnected. It's so easy to say those words. But in the actual interrelational interdependency of that lies our survival. And the metaphor that one woman used to describe this is the metaphor of imagining that you were going to need to learn how to breathe underwater. I thought that was an interesting metaphor. It's just that far away sometimes. It can feel just that difficult to imagine what it would actually be like to live differently. Another metaphor that comes up again and again, Robert Costanza brought it up yesterday, and it's certainly central to my work, is the metaphor of addiction, which is not so dissimilar from that metaphor of learning to breathe water. When what you imagine survival requires, i.e. going to your job, paying your bills, feeding your children, paying your mortgage, your rent, getting on airplanes, driving your car, all of those things that we do, when what you imagine survival to be has to be completely reorganized, and you can't imagine reorganizing it, that's not so dissimilar to the experience of someone who is dealing with a substance addiction or a behavior addiction. Right? It's not as though it isn't known that these habits are destructive. So why do we do it? Because we keep doing it. And every time I hear these projected timelines, okay, we've got to get the SDGs in place by 2030, and we're going to, stop carbon investment by 2020. It's always just around the corner, There's always just a little bit more time to think about it and get used to the idea and prepare for it. And on the one hand, that's realistic, because you can't just turn the Titanic on a dime. But on the other hand, it's exactly what someone says when they're trying to quit smoking. Yeah, I'm going to quit smoking next week. I'm just about to do it. It's just right around the corner. And instead of smoking, I'm going to do this other thing, right? Then comes the replacement substitutes. So I think that metaphor of addiction is something to at least keep with us in the room as we start talking about energy this afternoon. And to recognize how hard this process is to bring into our daily lives. I think everybody's back from coffee now. So we have a panel of 4 this afternoon. It's the same sort of format. Please, I think we only have 1 set of slides this afternoon, which may come as a relief because, +1. 1 set of slides +1. Also, our dear Governor of California, Jerry Brown, is not going to be joining us this afternoon. But we have a replacement, the substitute, none other than one of my favorite thinkers, Bill Reese. And I just want to introduce you to him because he'll be speaking last this afternoon. But Bill is the originator of the term, you may be familiar with this term, ecological footprint. What else was I supposed to say? You were used co-developer with lots of people around the theory around it. Especially Matisse Vatternagel. Let's begin. So, Jeremy, I would like to ask you to start.
Thank you. I have to do anything to turn it on, or is it? Who's Japanese calls me non-technology boy. I got there in the end. Thank you very much for the honor of going first in this interesting panel. And our persuasive chair has talked me out of using one of my beloved PowerPoint presentations. And for those who know me, that's a real wrench. But there are plenty of PowerPoints that you can download if you like PowerPoints from my website, which comes up if you Google my name. So I'm going to try and kick off the panel with a rapid spoken start with some key thoughts that have occurred to me as I've sat here for the 2 days and how they pertain to energy. I want to start with a recent report that was done by the New Climate Economy Commission that looks at the question of what it would cost us in global society to build the infrastructure that we're going to need by 2030, however we do it, with the current predominantly dirty technologies or with the kind of technologies we know we need if we're going to get to a net zero carbon world. And the answer to that question is $90 trillion, pretty much either way you do it. There's not a lot of saving in putting the infrastructure in, other than, of course, all the costs of climate change, climate ruin that you abate. But what you get, if you do it our way, the clean way, a way that would get you consistent with the Sustainable Development Goals, this isn't just about energy, this is about everything else, water, fisheries, the whole infrastructure that we're going to need, you get a direct economic gain of $26 trillion over the period. That's the world we're living in. We so ought to be able to win these arguments, not just in energy, but every other field of the Sustainable Development Goals, because the basic truth is that it's going to cost us more to wreck our world and torpedo civilization than it is to have a crack at saving it. So then let me take the energy portion of that, because the report, and let me just say incidentally, that report was produced by an array of real experts, many of them from the business community. The CEO of Unilever is on it, Paul Polman, the CEO of Statkraft, Torhild's colleague, Christian Runing-Thorsen is on it, and it's chaired by the former president of Mexico, Felipe Calderon. So it's a real group of mega experts and deeply experienced people. So I recommend that report to you if you don't know it. Let's take the energy part and go to what we know we need to do there. We heard it from a number of speakers yesterday. We have to go to zero net carbon. That's basically a world run on renewable energy. We have to do it by 2050 at the latest. And the first question that comes up, therefore, is that feasible? Is that remotely feasible to go to 100% by 2050? And here I can speak as a practitioner. I set up a solar energy company 20 years ago, motivated by my concerns about climate change. And I am absolutely confident that we can get to that target, all other things being equal and the political will being in place. I don't think solar is a magic bullet in the mix. In fact, the reason I'm so confident is that I know a little bit about the brother and sister technologies in wind particularly, but other forms of renewable, and of course storage. We are riding a wave of descending costs, systemic cost down, that we've not got anywhere near the bottom of at the moment. And we are going to come in cheaper than all the oppositions in all the opposition technologies in almost all markets by 2020. And that's not just an advocate speaking. This is the opinion you will get in many an investment bank from the analysts these days. This is the world we're living in. It is eminently doable, provided the political will is there and provided the capital is there. Those two things are connected. So let's just look at another key statistic of what we need to see happen over the period to get to this target. Right now, the world is investing in round figures $300 billion a year in clean energy, mostly in renewables, mostly in solar. We should be investing quite a bit more in energy efficiency than we are, but that's not hopeless. The worrying thing is that that figure has been more or less flat since 2011. It's not been going up, and it has to go up. It has to go up to roughly $1 trillion a year by 2030, averaged over the period between now and 2030. So a gap, there's a funding gap of around $700 billion. Now, I mean, we're living in a world with $280 trillion of wealth. How difficult is it going to be to achieve this? Okay, we've got $250 trillion of debt as well, but that's another question. So, that this can be done. And again, the excitement that one feels on the cutting edge is just how close we are to these takeoff points. It's not going to take much to make the capital markets dominoes fall and free up that extra $700 billion. I firmly believe we're going to see that too. Don't want to understate it. There's still a lot of backward-looking people in the financial services industry who are not listening to the messages and certainly not acting on them. But that, I believe, we will see change over the next few years. Which brings me on to the political will. Is the political will going to be there? And a number of speakers have talked about that. And it's a matter of great concern for the business community, I think, because we would be guilty of denial if we didn't acknowledge that there is a general drift to the right in politics, and with that, a drift away from the seriousness of intent that those of us who were in Paris on the last night of the Paris Agreement saw from governments. So it's good, therefore, that there is such an array of non-state actors beginning to engage really well and systemically. Not to be overstated, but plenty to work with here. And we saw that at the summit in California that Jerry Brown, sadly not here, organized a couple of weeks ago. You've got states like California taking on tough targets. You've got thousands of cities taking on tough targets and acting on them. You've got all kinds of companies taking on tough targets, the science-based targets, and the performance of many of the biggest corporations in the world on what are pretty exacting targets, but they're doing, I would say, on the whole, much better than most governments. There are 120 plus companies that are committed to 100% renewable electricity, some as soon as 2020, indeed some have already achieved it, including Google and Apple. And then you've got all the community action, the fact that if you put together all the renewable energy community projects in Germany, they would sum to the size of the 14th biggest energy utility in Europe, and on and on. So I think out of that, one can construct a positive analysis as well. So you can see I'm cautiously bullish, but I don't want to understate any of the problems. And I want to close my remarks by referring us back to the end of John Schellnhuber's lecture yesterday, because here too I think there is a vital role that the business world can play. And for those of you who weren't there, it was a picture of that beautiful Michelangelo painting in the Sistine Chapel of God and man and the fingers just about touching. And there's a third actor in there that is a cyborg, and that cyborg's finger is just about touching the human figure there. And John makes the very graphic and completely vital point that we don't want to end up in a world where we've solved all these environmental and economic problems and descended into police states with absolute control of populations. Or worse, and he said that if we don't control artificial intelligence and quantum computing in particular, when those two things are married in the visible future, and they then marry with robotics, we will have cyborgs with unbelievable power. And these creations of ours, if we do not remain in control and use the technologies involved for good and not ill, will, I think, very obviously make the solution that they can survive in this climate chaos world that we've bequeathed to the future, and they won't need us with them. So it sounds like something out of a science fiction movie, but the bedrock of that drama is being laid in real technology developments today. And the energy industry and companies in general, I think, are going to have to engage in using those technologies as best we can for good and controlling them so that they remain in human hands and we don't face an utterly dystopian and ultimately suicidal future. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Thorhild, who's coming in from Norway. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. I'm honored to participate in this celebration. Since the first publication, Limits to Growth, the Club of Rome has created a special place in people's mind, a place for respect, curiosity, and concern. Congratulations with the 50th anniversary, and I would like you to look back, yes, here in 1968, 50 years ago. The world was actually quite different from now. 1968 was a dark year. The year was the assassination of Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy. You remember the Soviet invaded Czechoslovakia. The Vietnam War was still going on. And Garrett Hardin described a world moving towards ecological breakdown in his Tragedy of the Common. Against this background, your club, the Club of Rome, met for the first time. Against this background, you wrote the Limits to Growth, and this points towards a brighter tone. In 1968 is also a powerful symbol of change and the will to change. This is exactly what I understand the Club of Rome is all about, to change in order to meet the global challenges facing humanity, and a hope that through knowledge and dialogue, humans can live in balance with nature. And we need this hope and the will to change no more than ever. The last IPCC report on the impacts of global warming of 1.50 degrees is a timely reminder of the need for change. However, I have hope. Think about the development we have seen for the last 50 years. The leaps in education, development, and freedom from poverty. Think about the progress we have made through international and multilateral cooperation, be it in common trade rules or in climate negotiation. This is why I am hopeful that even if we are facing backlashes in international cooperation, even if we face increased protectionism, and even if we face enormous challenges with regard to climate changes. If we look to the next one. Oh, yeah, here it is. Also, the development within energy has been rapid, especially the last decade. 50 years ago, the energy mix was primarily fossil-based, consisting of coal and oil. The development of nuclear power was in the beginning in the European countries, in the US, and also in Russia. The European Union actually has its roots in the coal and steel union amongst Belgium and Netherlands and other countries, as you know. Now, exactly, the European Union is the very region leading the way with an energy union, setting high ambitions and targets for emission cuts and transforming the energy sector. The company that I have the pleasure of being a chair for the board of directors is Europe's largest producer of renewable energy. We conduct thorough analysis of the development of energy markets. Understanding of the market is crucial for our value creation. However, looking at the rapid changes in the energy, we have all underestimated the technological and also the commercial development. Investment in renewable energy exceed investment in coal and gas power. Technology costs have fallen dramatically. Globally, a quarter of all electricity produced now comes from renewable sources. What happens then if these rapid technology costs continue to fall? If the development in renewable does not turn? If we extrapolate the changes, we will see the following. The power sector globally reaches a renewable share of 70% by 2040. The carbon intensity of the power sector falls by 80% by 2040 as renewable displaces the thermal generation. Solar power will become the largest source of power generation on a global basis and cover almost 30% of all electricity generation. And wind power will cover 20% in 2040. Due to cheaper and greener power, electricity will cover over 30% of energy consumptions in buildings, industry, transport sectors in 2040. And as much as 70% of all new passenger vehicles sold globally can be fully electric in 2040. And the really good news is that energy-related emission in 2040 will be about 30% lower than today, with emissions following a pathway that is consistent with the 2-degree target. I think these are great perspectives. This is why I have hope, and our analysis only looks at 2040, only 20 years ahead. Just imagine how much more that can be developed if we look 50 years ahead. And there are many positive developments. For example, the 15 largest banks in the world, including JP Morgan, Societe Generale, and Deutsche Bank, have implemented restriction on financing coal projects. This is very good news. And we see also a lot of other very good signals. And if we look to the third picture I have, 3 years after Paris, the question is, of course, can we make it in time? The latest IPCC report is not, of course, for optimism, but it is possible. We need countries to move in the same direction. Global challenges require global action. And especially now, with the world facing new challenges, big migration, climate change, we need multilateral cooperation more than ever. And some countries must take leadership. EU, China, and others. Not everything needs to be put on a global scale right away. I believe that there is a lot of things we can do in the different regions as well, and everything will help. The Paris Agreement is a big step in the right direction. This agreement commits all countries to contribute, not in the same way or the same effort in size, but commit to contribute. In December in Poland, we will get the first signal whether countries are willing to step up their commitment from which we already know that they are all too little to keep global warming below 1.5 degrees. And in order to turn solutions into collective actions, we need good incentives for all decisions to be taken by industry and business. That also means we need well-designed markets to provide market signals to all participants. And we need a global carbon price. We need good and effective markets. Let them work. Design them well. 2018 is not 1968. We have come further in many regards, but we also see steps back. And we are faced with the biggest challenges of them all, how humans can coexist with nature in a sustainable manner. We need you, the Club of Rome, to continue your important work, to turn warnings into hope and possibilities, to advise us how to change behavior, and not least, require action. I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Francesco.
So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I was given as a present when I was in high school this book, The Limits of Growth. And I think it was a present from an uncle of mine. And I kept reading this book the first time, and then over the years, several times. The book is still in my home, so I still have it. And with these graphs, you know, A, B, 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 C, C, C. At that time, I had no clue of what I was going to do in my life. I was not aware of climate. I was not aware of what work environment I was going to be in. I was just a guy in high school enjoying life. So it's kind of a shock that I find myself speaking at the Club of Rome after 50 years. So it's very strange. That said, you know, let's have a little bit of reflection over one thing. There are still in the world, I guess, more than 100,000 people that think that the Earth is flat. For sure. I'm sure there are more than 100,000 people that think that the world is flat. And I think there will be always someone thinking that, because the experience visually is that the world is indeed flat. And I think that we should stop worrying about how many people are not convinced about what's happening to the world and what's happening to the Earth, to our planet, because of climate change and the man-induced effects of climate change. Let's stop worrying about that, because it's no more really material. What we observed in the last, I would say, 10 years is a step change in one major direction, which is driven basically by a force that I believe is largely out of control, which is the evolution of technology. Technology's evolution, in my opinion, is something that has its own organic pattern nowadays, and it's probably a Faustian exercise, and I would say also an exercise of incredible arrogance to think that we can materially influence the direction in which technology is evolving nowadays. It's simply too big, too complex, and self-feeding. But what we observe is that in the domain of energy, which is the one in which I happened at the end to direct my career, we observe what Jeremy and Torrind have just explained, you know, the unstoppable, apparently, penetration of renewable energy into the generation part of the value chain in electricity at the expense of other fossil fuel alternatives. And I'm using the word alternative intentionally, because this is now how this was the word that we used to talk about, to use to define renewable energy. For many years, this was conceived to be an alternative energy form. I think this is now mainstream going forward, and the other stuff is alternative. Every time there is none of renewable that we can use. It's true what Jeremy said and what Torrind said. The reduced cost of the hardware and the improved performance of the same hardware combined are such that the cost of generating energy from renewable energy sources is increasingly beating the marginal cost of generating energy with existing infrastructure. That's a tipping point. Not new infrastructure. No one is really thinking about building new infrastructure on fossil fuels nowadays. But existing infrastructure, they defend their space. Now, this is a point in which the marginal cost of generating energy with existing infrastructure is beaten by new renewable energy power plants. When this happens, a technology wipes out the other one. It's just a question of time, and of course, what kind of obstacles politicians or regulators want to put in this path. But even if they do that, at the end, reality prevails all the time. So we are looking at a world in which we strongly believed about 5 years, 6 years, 7 years ago when we started developing renewables on a competitive basis, which is now in front of us. And this world is full of surprises in many, many ways. It changes deeply the way in which generation has been conceived over the last 100 years. It changed deeply the way in which project and which development of new initiatives was developed so far. It was the domain of big companies. Now it's open to many, many players, including private individuals. So it multiplies by thousands the number of opportunities and the variety of technologies and the combination of technologies that can be used, and it makes it very complex indeed, and very, very difficult for governments to direct in some ways. So it's scary, if you want, in some ways. If you feel that you want to manage it, it's really another ball game on one end. On the other, it has an unstoppable force because the multitude of players that makes it so strong. It's also true that it is becoming a fairly open and wide global competitive battlefield where cost cutting and cost efficiency and scale matter. So companies eventually that organize themselves in the better way will be very successful in this field. And it's also true that it entails a rethinking of everything downstream from generation to the customer, which has to do with transmission, distribution of electricity going down. And that sector of the energy industry, which for decades has been considered, and I hope no one gets offended, the less intelligent and the more stupid, where wires are wires and what to do with them, just let them hang around and that's it, you know. That part is now the most crucial and most sexy part of the value chain, where digital is playing a big role, where what matters is how you distribute energy at low and medium voltage, no more at big high voltage level, and how you manage transients from day and night, how you manage transients from an hour to the other in constant directional, bidirectional flows. So that sector also is benefiting from technology. So we see this huge technology tsunami hitting the industry with a great impact. Is it for the good or bad? We think it's hugely for the good. And the driving forces are two. One is hidden in the word digital, which affects hardware and customer behavior in a positive way. I can then digress on that later. The other one word is less known, and it is the continuous stupefying, I would say, improvement of materials that material science is bringing everywhere. So it's our experience that as time goes by, stuff gets better, lighter, cheaper, more resistant, lots of stuff gets better all the time. These two things are the reason why renewable energies are now cheap as they are. And these two things are the reason why grids that are being digitized have performances that are unthinkable today and were unthinkable and even not conceivable by the time this infrastructure was designed. So the combination of these things makes it that systems are progressively observing a penetration of zero marginal cost energy brought in by renewable energy sources. And what happens when that takes place is that the overall cost of electricity tends to go down, to drop at wholesale level. And second, the energy becomes less sensible to the variations of commodities. So electricity all of a sudden becomes cheaper and stable. And at that point, it becomes available for uses that were not conceived before. In fact, you will see in the next month, the International Energy Agency will publish its own World Energy Outlook, and this is the year of electrification. The world is being electrified at twice the speed at which overall global energy demand is taking place, which means electricity is penetrating into the mix. Of course, we like it because we deal with electricity, so it's good to be in that part. But we also like it because electricity can be managed more precisely, it can be used more efficiently, digital has an impact, machines love electricity much more than other stuff, and we think as you progressively decarbonize electricity and use it in other economics activities, you decarbonize them too. So the world will be decarbonized faster than we think through this loop of electrification that is taking place. So there's good hope. That's not to say that things are all fine. There is still a huge amount of money thrown at fossil fuels in terms of incentives and fiscal benefits that I think will just partially delay the end of that season, and it's a pity, but that's life. So I think, for me, there is hope, and it's an exciting future for an electrified world. Thank you very much.
So our next speaker, Bill Rees, I guess I just want to invite you to approach this from another direction. Because I feel sort of, as just a human being, as a mom, I get really worried when I think about the fact that we have to actually incentivize survival. That troubles me. As Ian was saying, this is a context of an emergency situation. And we can ask ourselves, do societies run on energy or do they run on economies? In this place where economy and energy and technology are all coming together in the form of basic needs. I live in Sweden. Not having any energy in Sweden is a cold reality. Maybe I go back to California. But there's no water. So Bill, I invite you to come at this from a completely different direction, and let's stir the pot.
Well then, now for something completely different. I am not well prepared because I was only recently asked to take this task on. It took me several hours, actually, to get over the fact that I'm not Jerry Brown. I hope you can also leap through that dimension and listen to me for what I have to say as not Jerry Brown. What I want to do is to try to put my remarks and everything else we've heard for the last few days in the context of Schellenhubert's challenge. Because I don't really think the seriousness of this has sunk in. We're talking about a 50% reduction in our primary energy use in a 12-year period during which we expect economic activity and the population to grow very significantly, 20 or 30%. This is a virtually impossible challenge for reasons that I will get to. At least I will get to some of those reasons. But we're in a situation that I would describe as a conundrum because we don't really understand the problem we are trying to solve. We do not understand the problem we are trying to solve. I'm going to just touch on three elements of that from the perspective of an evolutionary ecologist. So the human being, the human brain, if you will, evolved in the context of small tribal systems. You might expect in the course of a lifetime to meet a couple of dozen other people. Your home range would be a matter of a few hundred square kilometers at most. You could not, even with all of your cohorts, have a serious impact on this local environment. It was understandable, comprehensible, and one's tribe could adapt to those local environmental circumstances virtually indefinitely. Once the Maori settled in New Zealand, or better still, the Aboriginals in Australia, they managed to survive in their ecosystems for some 50,000 years. We're on the verge of wiping ours out in a matter of a couple of centuries. So there's something wrong here. I would argue then that we have created, because we are an intelligent species, a complex integrated macro system consisting of the human economy, the internet, now artificial intelligence, social systems of great diversity, all interacting with biophysical systems, the ecosystems, the biosphere at large, the ecosphere, the atmosphere, the climate system. And all of these things have merged and come together in one massively complex system, characterized in each of its subdivisions by lags, thresholds, and nonlinear behaviors that we can't hope to predict or understand or control should they run awry. So basically, I'm going to start by saying we have created a world in which we have lost control. It may not have gone beyond some tipping point yet, but when it does, it won't matter because we won't be able to do anything about it. We won't even know which levers to pull, if you want to put it in mechanistic terms. The second point I'm going to make may surprise some of you, but again, it comes from this evolutionary perspective. And that is that the dilemma, the predicament in which we find ourselves is an entirely natural phenomenon. All right? It's an entirely natural phenomenon. We do not like to think of ourselves as a species of animal. You are animals. You are animals. You are not primarily rational in any of your behavior. Now, most of us are academics or scientists or whatever, and we tend to believe we are rational, but if you've been paying attention in these debates, you will see that emotion and instinct and a variety of defensive mechanisms, all sorts of things that operate subliminally below consciousness, have a much greater effect on our individual and much greater effect on our group behavior than does rational intelligence. Now, let me give you just an illustration of what I'm getting at here. Every species has the inherent biological capacity for exponential growth in a rich environment. Every species, including humans, will expand to fill all available or accessible habitat. Which species on this planet has the largest geographical range among vertebrates? They're sitting in your seats. Okay? It's human beings. And a few rats and mice that follow us around picking up the leaves. Okay? All species tend to consume all available resources. All species tend to consume all available resources. Now, humans are better at both of these qualities or behaviors than any other species because of technology. Our technology enables us to access petroleum 4 kilometers below the sea surface and another couple below the bottom of the sea. We're scraping, literally, the bottom of our earthly barrel for energy resources. So we're simply getting better and better than other species at extracting and pillaging the ecosystems that would sustain us. Okay. Pardon me. Like all species, human beings are thermodynamic entities. We are energy dissipators. Every species seeks out sources of energy by which it constructs itself. We are self-organizing, self-producing systems that extract energy and organized matter from our ecosystems and use them to produce ourselves and all our accoutrements, and in the process greatly increase the entropic damage done to the external environment. So the negentropy that we produce in our own bodies and in all of our infrastructure is at the enormous cost of a great increase in the entropic disordering of the environment in which we live. Now, we operate according to something that a mathematical ecologist developed early in the 20th century and was refined by Howard Odum. So Lotka's recognized, listen now very carefully, that successful individuals, species, and ecosystems are those systems that maximize their extraction and efficient use of energy from their ecosystems. Successful systems are those systems which maximize their extraction and efficient use of energy from their ecosystems. I gotta grab my water. Okay, any questions?
Would you repeat that?
Yeah, right. Okay. This operates then in a competitive environment. And human beings have competitively displaced most other mammalian life. Human beings now have gone from much less than 1% to 36% of the biomass of mammals on the planet. And when you throw in our domestic livestock, that is increased to somewhere between 97 and 98.5%. All of wild vertebrate nature, at least mammalian nature, is reduced to 1.5% of the remaining energy flow through natural ecosystems. Again, human beings are inordinately successful at the evolutionary game of competitive exclusion through the acquisition of energy. So, can I have just one more minute? Right there. My slides should now come up. I've just got 3. Listen, I had to throw this together very early this morning. We do not appreciate the speed of change that we have induced on this planet. It took 200,000 years of Homo species to reach the first billion. It took a mere 200 years, or 1/1000th of that time, to accelerate to 7.6 billion, which is our current population. During that period, gross global product has increased 100-fold, per capita incomes and therefore consumption by about 13 or 14-fold, twice that in the wealthy countries. This is in the space of 200 years, a flash in time of human evolution. Next, please. Meanwhile, the Earth didn't get any larger. May I have the next one? Oh, do I do that? Okay. There we go. This is what it looks like in sheer numerical terms. So this flat line at the back, I could extend 200,000 years in that direction. What you should get from this curve is that we have seen in just 200 years a massive explosion of the human enterprise, which is entirely founded on the availability of cheap fossil energy. This cannot continue. It can't even stay there in the absence of a substitute for cheap, abundant fossil fuel. That's the first point to make. The second is, if we find that cheap, abundant substitute for fossil fuel, we will destroy the planet. That is the second major conundrum in front of us. Because the way we use energy is to convert all of the other negentropic value on the planet into human bodies and human infrastructure, our automobiles and fancy stuff and all of that. So, we are already in overshoot. Oh, that's me again. This isn't a question of having to back off because we might transgress some limits. We've been in overshoot in terms of our demands for biocapacity and the displacement of other species for a couple of decades now. And nobody has paid the remotest attention in the policy domain. If we are going to satisfy Schiller's criterion, it means massive contraction of energy use and material consumption in the first world to create the ecological space necessary for justifiable ethical growth in those countries that have not enjoyed it. It's a form of contraction and convergence, if I can borrow something. Okay. All right, I have another major point, but I'm apparently not going to get to it. I appreciate your patience to this point. Thanks very much.
So we find ourselves back where we started. We have a double bind. And on the one hand, there's all this positive possibility of creating new energy. And on the other hand, there's the possibility that we might use that energy in ways that would actually use more ecological resources and extraction and create deeper habituated consumption. I recently learned that in the etymology of the word consumption, if you ever get a chance to look this up, you might be fascinated to learn that consumption does not mean to use or to take in or those things that you think it might mean. Consumption actually means to destroy by separating into pieces that cannot be put back together. Isn't that interesting? So no wonder when we start to think of citizens as consumers, this is a problem. Okay, so obviously energy is at the heart of all of this. It is arguably one of the most critical issues of this moment. And I think I'd like to start with the floor and then come back. Is that okay with everybody? Is there anything burning? Okay. Oh my gosh, this game again. Anders, I'll start with you. It's not fair, but yeah.
I mean, I don't know what to pick, because Bill's final comments, of course, are very, very challenging. But I'd like to ask Jeremy in particular, because you alluded to the investments since 2011, yearly roughly $300 billion US for primarily renewable energy. And because of the fact that the capacity of those technologies and the price have gone up and the price have gone down, it means that more is installed every year, but still it's at a too low level. In the climate emergency initiative that we have been preparing, we talk about a tripling of investments in terms of renewables before 2025. You said 2030, it doesn't matter so much. But the really tricky issue, and I leave Bill's issues to the side for the time being, is if we really want developing countries not to get stuck in the coal-based economy, we really need to reach out to them, because development means access to modern energy carriers. If they do not have reasonable renewable capacity, they will develop coal and gas and oil. So what according to you, and maybe all of you would like to respond to that. I mean, we know that the technologies are there, the financial resources probably are there, but these investments are looked upon as too risky. So what needs to happen? What would the recipe look like to really beef up renewable capacity in as many low-income countries as possible? And I mean, I know that China is doing a lot. 2/3 of all the renewable investments take place in developing countries in China. But if we look at most of Africa, it's not as rosy.
And I'd like to allow you to speak for just a moment. We had spoken before, Mr. Lior, Niam Lior.
Thank you very much. Very pleased to talk to you. I had to promise. Can you hear me? Okay. I had to promise Nora that I'll mention the words complexity at least once, and I will start with that. I work in energy for many years, and it's very interesting field because there are continuous changes. You know, you cannot write a set of notes or write a paper based on what was happening last year. So I collected a number of major game changers which reflect on what we should think about in the future, and also as to what is the value of modeling if there are game changers all the time. So the simplest one, in fact, which you probably don't even consider as a game changer anymore, but it's a good example, it is the postponement of the peak oil situation. Many people, companies, scientists, researchers, and so on, have developed their whole career on the prospect that there will be peak oils very soon. In fact, Nixon's administration had a peak oil and a plan for energy independence for the United States to begin in 1985. So that didn't happen, and we also know that it's not going to happen anytime soon from the data that we have. And there is one of the reasons is partially it's conservation, but mostly it's the unconventional energy sources that have been found and used more recently, such as shale oil, shale gas, oil sands, and so on. So we have another problem, which is a game changer, is the ruinous fluctuations in the price of oil. It goes to the ratio of about 1 to 6. Anywhere in the last 2 years or so, it was anywhere between $25 or so a barrel and up to 147. It is impossible to develop any energy technology with this competition. You don't know what to aim at. If you build a solar energy system and the oil goes down to $25 a barrel, you're cooked, okay? We cannot also design, because we design plants for 25, 30 or more years, you know, so we don't know whether to emphasize the energy efficiency or the low capital cost. And this is something that can be done by policy, okay, and everybody is afraid to do it. Accelerated decoupling of energy use and the GDP. I don't like GDP just like any of you, okay, but in fact that's what they use because it's the simplest evaluator of economic development. But in the past it was obvious, all the economists predicted that if you want to have a higher GDP, you must use more energy. This is not true. There are many countries that have proven it, okay, and except for the very low energy consuming or low GDP countries, okay. Transition to energy independence of the US is a very new phenomenon. Don't tie Trump with it and don't boo me, but it does help for world peace and stability. The United States can now export energy, in fact, and back in the 70s, we didn't know if we'll have enough, and there were all kinds of bad plans and so on.
No.
Yes.
We need to keep the conversation going through the room. Make one more point, and then let's continue. Do you have a question?
Sorry?
Do you want to bring a question in?
No, I can tell you one more thing. Well, another game changer is the increased support of organized religion for sustainable development. Mm-hmm. It is the Patriarch Bartholomew II, you know, who is really the Orthodox Christian cardinal, and Pope Franciscus. It's the first time that we have, let's say, a flock of maybe 1.5 billion people who have been guided that sustainable development is very important. If you want to know more, just ask me.
Thank you. Can give it to her. Thank you, whoever.
How about a woman next? Yeah. Woman. I'll go next.
Woman.
Thank you very much. I see it's very difficult to be fair in whom to pick with who will raise the question, but it's also easy, very easy if we compare it with the challenge of solving climate change, which is a much more difficult issue, of course. And since we've been talking about solutions here, I feel there's generally always two solutions to solve the issue of climate change. One is from the perspective of tech fixes, so more electric vehicles, renewable energy, and so forth. And on the other hand, we would have a behavioral change, changes in diet, and so forth. Since this session was specific to energy and electricity, I would take this comparison of tech fixes versus behavioral changes into this arena of electricity. And as we will have increasing renewable energy in the electricity sector, we all know that renewables are intermittent. So not every day is as beautiful as today, so the sun doesn't shine every day. So we again have two options, where one is we build battery storage and so forth, so we use technology to come over this issue, and the other option would be that we use behavioral change. We talk about consumers, but we could also have prosumers. What is in the future in a grid where we have almost only renewables or only renewables? Will it be possible, will people accept that we do not always have electricity for everything we need? Will there be a need for behavioral change? So maybe we can learn from looking specific electricity. We can learn from looking specifically into the electricity behavioral change versus tech fixes, how we can solve overall the climate problem, behavioral or tech fixes, or both.
Thank you. And Petra, would you like to, we need the voice of at least one woman.
I have a question to Jeremy and to Torrid. I would like you to give us an example of where energy change is really decentralized, empowering people, etc. Just an example. I'm living in the East German countryside. I live in a nature park for a reason, because there are no windmills. And if you go to the northern Berlin area, there are 500 windmills, and I am a supporter of renewable energies. It's horrific. It's absolutely horrific. And people pay more in this area for electricity than they pay in southern Germany. Germany is the front runner in renewable energy. So it's all like bureaucratic, and the municipalities have to be dealing with that. Aurelio Peccei, in Limits to Learning, said 1977, when we do the energy transition to renewable energy in exactly the same way we've been doing things in the past, it's not going to work, and it's not going to solve the problem. So can we have two examples where energy transition is absolutely empowering for communities in terms of democracy and in terms of economics, etc., and people benefit?
Okay, let's take that to the panel. That one was directed at Jeremy or Thorhild, so go right ahead.
Press. Yeah, there we are. So let me try and respond to a couple of the points that were made, including the last one, and just an overall thought about Bill's presentation. I would have to agree that if we are just another animal and we don't learn, and we, can't apply any degree of rationality to the situation we're in, then we will collapse like all the other ecological examples, all the other animals who have reached overshoot. I think in the words of Daryl Hannah in the wonderful film Blade Runner, we are stupid and we will die. But I don't believe that. I think we have the chance to think our way through this. This is a huge discussion, but there are positive arguments in Noah Juval's book about how over a couple of hundred years we are changing, we are becoming more pro-social, we are becoming much less violent. Seems difficult to believe looking at the world. And I think, we have to work with this kind of hope, if you like, and that then brings me to the example of solar and communities and everything else. We have to learn hard and fast. And one of my great hopes is that solar and renewables help us do that, like perhaps no other form of energy production. If you line up all those 17 Sustainable Development Goals and you think about how solar energy applies to them, it applies to each and every one. Each and every one. I won't go through it, but it's a really interesting intellectual exercise. And so my first example to you is little solar lights in the developing world. So my company gives 5% of its profits to a charity of our own creation called Solar Aid. And we don't give lights away, but we act as a non-profit selling lights, we've sold nearly 2 million solar lights. We do follow-up work in the field. We know the facts and figures of what these little solar lights do. And the single biggest, I can't remember the figure, but the single biggest and most impressive statistic is homework hours. We have created billions of extra homework hours. And you know how important that is in all the issues we're talking about, particularly female homework hours and all the things that can come from that. So that's a little example, and I'll come back to your second example. You asked me for two, right, in just a minute. Because these solar lights, of course, are knocking out kerosene. They give better quality light. People can see at night. And people who can't even afford kerosene can afford one of these little entry-level lights that lights up the night for them and gets them on the ladder of development. So then the other point is about exponential growth, and Anders made this point, so that this is my effort to address your point, Anders. Here again, there are things we can learn from our experiences about exponential growth that are potentially really positive. And the Silicon Valley gurus like Ray Kurzweil, make the point that as analysts, we can't get our heads around exponential. And that works in a positive way as well as a negative one. So right now, solar energy is well under 2% of world energy. And the amount of solar deployed has doubled 7 times between 2000 and now. Double it, and the average, therefore, is once every 2 years, thereabouts. Double it another 6 times. You can do this on an Excel spreadsheet. And what do you get? You get enough solar energy to provide all the world's current global energy demand. Now, that's a ridiculous idea because we've got so many other bits of tools in the kit with which to meet that demand. But you see the basic point. The basic point is this, and I think we've already seen it in history. Nobody got this existing growth of solar right. Nobody projected it, not even the advocates of solar energy. We didn't see it coming so fast, and it's going to continue coming fast. So when someone said, we'll never cut emissions to 0 by 2050, if I had to bet my pension, all other things being equal and accepting politics, I think we will get to 100% renewable energy well before 250. And so then let's finish with the second example that you asked me for two. So I've given you one microcosm in the developing world, and then let me give you one in the developed world. So if all this is true, what can we trigger in communities? Well, I've seen this in community renewable energy projects in miserable Britain. We don't have as many community energy projects as you do in Germany, but we have some. And I've gone and talked to town halls and, you know, people who've put these projects together. Populations of towns, conservative towns, most of rural Britain, I'm sure you appreciate, is conservative. And our partners out there are building these solar farms, and they have ownership in it, and there are all kinds of ways that has triggered pro-social consumer community behavior. So I'll shut up now. I hope I've responded to a couple of questions in a useful way.
I think Jeremy, he answered the most of the question, but I was thinking about when in 2004, 2005, I was the Minister for Petroleum and Energy in Norway. Everybody was focusing on how we could produce more, how much more oil and gas could we get out of our shelf. Nobody was thinking about the huge potential that actually was there regarding renewables. Even though Norway I mean, all the domestic use is actually coming from the renewable in Norway. We don't use gas domestically. We don't use the oil that is actually coming from the shelf. But I can see some changes now because people are focusing on how they can use more and more, and they are willing to both look into how we can get the system more efficient, but also focusing on the broader picture of the renewables when it comes to the wind and solar. And regarding the price, I'm pretty sure that we have the cheapest price in Europe, in Norway, even though we are connected to the rest of Europe in the price systems. But I see that I really believe in the market. The more renewable we can get into the market, the price will go down. I really believe in people because when the people think they can do something, they do it themselves. Look into, for example, the solar today. The more and more people back home, I see in small community, they are invested into it themselves. They would like to have the solar panel on the roof, on their house, in the institution. And I think there will be a tremendous and radical changes also in the rest of Europe from the years to come in this regard. And I really believe that to open people's mind, give information like you are doing in this, from this club, give the information from the politicians, make some statements. There's a good saying that said that people's mind is like a parachute. It does not work if it is not open. So we really have to open people's mind and give more information about what the alternative is. Thank you.
I just wanted to comment also on this question on the Energiewende and the way in which Germany approaches this. You know, we are in many, many countries in the world, and we see this transition happening in different ways. And there are countries that are lucky, simply. They have simply so much in energy resources that for them is easy. Like Costa Rica is one of them, for example. And they're small, and it's easy. There are countries that are not so easy, and Germany is certainly a complex, very heavy industrialized part of the world with a lot of energy demand. So the path is not simple. But if you take Chile in 6 years dramatically reduced the cost of wholesale energy, basically halved it, simply switching to on a competitive basis to renewable energy. And Chile has a heavy industry consumption, is a big country, has a difficult grid to manage, but they managed the transition in, I would say, an exemplary way. So there is something that everybody can learn. So what does Chile have that Europe does not have? They have a forward-looking market that Europe does not have. They have a market that gives price signals 20 years down the road. And that cures drastically the useless discussion about fluctuation of oil and gas and coal prices. No one makes an investment decision based on today's oil, gas, and coal prices in the industry. Not anymore. Those that did it, and we all did it, we wrote off 200 billion euros of investment based on that idiotic concept. So the fact is that today, fluctuation of oil, gas, and coal are immaterial. Every time you have a forward-looking market that goes 10 years in the future. And that's what is needed to have a rational transition. The issue is that Europe decided not to have that in 2003. Now it's coming back, thank God. So I think next wave of renewable energy development in Europe will be much different than the previous one because of this simple issue: forward-looking, stable energy market and pricing.
Oh, this one.
There you go.
There we go. Why is it, if the cost of renewables is falling so dramatically and is now below that of other conventional forms of energy, is investment in renewable energy in steady decline in most of the world? Germany, to take that example, often called a leader in renewable energy in the Western world, has subsidized solar, if I'm not mistaken, to the tune of about 200 billion euros. What they've gained from that is about 1.5% of its total energy demand. Total primary energy supply comes from solar after $1 billion or $200 billion euro investment. Even in Britain, investment in renewable energy has virtually dropped to zero in the last couple of years. So it's a puzzle to me why it is that we see these falling prices accompanied by renewed investment in fossil energy. In fact, China, which a few years ago was proudly praised for dropping 100 coal-fired plants from production, is now constructing those plants again. And it seems the reason is that even though they have a massive investment in renewable energy, because the payback time is over the 25-year or 30-year life cycle of the equipment, it simply doesn't provide enough energy initially after the investment to maintain the pace of growth required for the Chinese economy. So I don't have anything against renewable energy. I'm just asking, why is it that structurally it's making such a small dent in the ways in which investment is deployed in this domain?
Here come the hands. Does anyone know who was first? You were. Okay, you and then you.
I have a technical question to all of you, really. We live in an urbanizing world, and increasingly in a world of megacities. Typically, the megacities that are emerging all over the planet now, particularly in developing countries, have been powered, as in some already been implied, by fossil fuel energy. Some of them are being powered by hydropower, some of them being powered by nuclear energy. But my question to you is a very simple question. Do you think, all of you on the panel, whether or not megacities of tens of millions of people can actually be converted to run on renewable energy other than hydro? Thank you.
Back to that person. He was next.
Thank you very much. Peter Hennicke from Wuppertal Institute, Germany, working since, 3 decades on the German Energiewende and trying to cooperate with Japan, Korea, Australia to extend and foster the energy transition. I want to reconcile Bill's position with the position of Jeremy and the other colleagues on the panel. Nobody of us needs kilowatt hours. Really nobody in this room, in industry, in transportation. What we need is energy services. And this always means to produce electricity as much as possible from renewables, but then to transform it into energy services, meaning cooling, comfortable buildings, communication, power, and all these nice things which we get from energy services. This means that we have to reconcile the supply side with the demand side. Otherwise, we will really not solve the problem. If you look into any scenario, worldwide for Germany. You will find that primary energy has to be reduced by at least 30%, in Germany 50%. That was your point, Bill. Quite correct. So there is no scenario, no vision where we can transform the energy system alone with renewables. So to combine both and to foster the energy efficiency, meaning not only with technical questions, but meaning looking into lifestyles, looking into rebound effects, looking in more sustainable patterns of production and consumption, and then bring it together with the supply side on renewables. That solves the acceptance problems, what Petra mentioned. We have a lot of problems in the wind power regions, no doubt. That solves the cost question because it brings the cost down, and it solves the resource question. I know this will not answer all our questions, but the combination of both, this is the complete answer on the energy transition.
Excellent.
Okay, we've got one in the back, and then Yoshi, and then we can come. We'll take 3 more questions. And then... Oh, first him.
Hi, Piattelli, Italian Solar Association. Just I would like to have an impression about the possibility to have a global carbon tax in order to try to accelerate decarbonization.
Such a nice short question. Yoshi, next.
Thank you. Regarding automobile, I understand that several countries is seeking for electric vehicle. In one sense, it's very good, but it's very dangerous. Some countries are restricting too much. Only electric vehicle will be allowed. So that will discourage very much another new technology development. For example, fuel cell engine. So rather, so if some, in the future possible new technologies, we should not, say, restrict or disturb the development. So tax incentives are still should be given to such possible new technologies. That was proved in Japan about the 2000. After reforming the tax for low emission cars, for example, Prius, hybrid car, very much well sold, and then price were down, and then were distributed, all the emissions drastically down. So such kind of concerns is very important. Thank you.
And then we'll do a response. One more, and then we'll...
Hi, this is Stefan Armenia from the Italian chapter of the System Dynamics Society. I just want to build on what Bill was saying and ask a question about where are we going to find the resources and all the silicium to build, all the solar power that we need. And if the decarbonizing loop is also taking into account the fact that we're producing a lot of garbage throughout the world. And second thing, I was wondering whether the aware use of energy can be, let's say, enforced by the fact that we can maybe educate the younger generations in also an aware use of energy, and by means, for example, of systems thinking. So how education from younger grades can help, and in some way to dance with the systems, as Dana was saying. And by the way, let me just make a small spot. We're translating this book in Italian for all the Italian readers. So how education can help? Thanks.
Okay, bring it back to the panel. Bill, you had something you wanted to say?
I'm struggling again with the feeling that what we're doing here is trying to maintain the status quo by other means. So we talked many times during the last couple of days about the need for radical change in our thinking, a new mindset, a new economic framework. But almost all of this discussion is about how we can use technology to keep going in precisely the same direction we're going right now. And I can guarantee you that if we succeed in that, it's the end of the ecosphere as we know it, and perhaps of a variety of other issues. Another point, I'm not an energy expert, but I have a simple question when I go to alternative energy meetings that I always ask. And that is, can your source of energy produce itself through its whole life cycle? Can it produce the equipment needed to mine the minerals and transport them and manufacture and refining and all of that stuff, and still have enough surplus to run all the other energy needs of society? And so far, I don't know, I'm asking, has anyone ever asked that question about solar or wind or any of the other alternatives? To the best of my knowledge, the only energy source we have with sufficient density to do that is fossil fuel. The fact that it's the basis of our entire infrastructure indicates that it is not only capable of producing itself, but all of this additional material. Absent fossil fuel. By the way, we use fossil fuels to make all of the alternative energy infrastructure and equipment in place right now. So if we're going to double and double again and fill the entire world with these alternative energy framings, is it going to be done with alternative energy or fossil fuel? So I think it's a real question.
Perhaps I can answer that question right now, Bill, because we run a factory that produces solar models. So we did this calculation because we wanted to keep track of that. And the answer is very similar to other answers that other manufacturers or other companies have found over the years, that the energy you need to produce a solar panel is basically the energy this panel is producing in its first year and a half of operation. So that's it. So that's the answer.
But no, it's not the answer, because you're just talking...
And maybe I should add one thing. There is a nice research that is called, it's titled Buried Burning Sunshine. Burning Buried Sunshine, by Jeffrey Dukes of the University of Utah. You might want to look at Google and find out. It's a paper, so it's a paper. So this guy in 2004, so some time ago, found out that what are we actually doing on the globe is taking enough solar radiation that came in the geological eras that preceded ourselves, that has been transformed into carbon through the fossilization process, and use it. And it's an interesting paper. If you look at it, it finds out that a year of fossil fuel utilization is equivalent to about 13,200 solar irradiation years of eras ago. So obviously this is unsustainable. Obviously this is crazy. Obviously this produces heat, because it's as if you had in 1 year 13,200 solar years hitting the head on our planet. So, and thank God now, through technology, there is a totally different story. And I think, to go back to the other question on cities, there is not such a city that is illuminated or fed by X amount of nuclear energy, or cities are fed by energy. The mix is what matters. So you can have, it's difficult, and it's something totally misleading to say, this thing is made by renewable energy only. It's impossible, unless you only have the plant and the factory connected and nothing else in between. When you put energy into a network, that energy is mixed with all the rest of the energy produced in different ways. So all you can say is, what is the amount of renewable energy that gets into the mix? And because that amount keeps increasing, like I said, the evidence is it keeps increasing at twice the speed of global energy demand. So the amount of renewable energy will, at the end, come to higher percentages that today we are thinking of. And yes, cities will be totally sustainable in that sense, if that is what you were asking. Is there a city today like that? Yes, Oslo is one. Oslo is fed by renewable energy fully, because Norway is like that. Okay? So it's as simple as that. There is not such a thing as a city fed by nuclear and a city fed by renewables, with some small exception. It's a mix.
There we go. Do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Yes, thank you.
The microphones are getting tired of us.
Yeah, I think it is. First of all, I think it is very difficult to say when and if all the cities around the world will be or use only renewables. I mean, I'm focusing on the transport sector and the buildings, and I think it is the industry. It is has an enormous if we are changing it for both the transport sector and industry and the buildings, that they will contribute significantly when it comes to the emission reduction. So I think this is what I have experienced ourselves in the company, and that is how we can see both India and China has come up with good examples how they work with that. But let me come up with one example. For example, on the electric energy in a vehicle is around 90% efficient, which is 3 to 4 times more efficient than a conventional vehicle energy. And that is, for example, just one example how you can also focusing on how you can get more efficient of the energy that you actually use today. And when you can also say the similar energy savings of around 60% is possible when switching from fossil fuels heating to electric heating by using heat pumps.
So many things, but let me just address two of the things that Bill said. He said that investment in renewable energy is going down, has been going down around the world. That's not the case. The Bloomberg New Energy Finance stats and others show quite clearly that it's been essentially flat since 2011, as I said in my remarks. And anyone who wants charts and source URLs for this, my email is jeremy.leggett@solarcentury.com. Bill also posited that the reason that the investment is going down is because we have a hopeless energy payback in solar and renewables. Francesco's already addressed that, but there are a number of studies that show it's not the case, and the most recent one that I know of makes the point that actually the payback now on solar, because of all the efficiencies in the manufacturing, the cells get thinner, the processes get more efficient. The energy payback in solar is so short now that it's less than the energy payback in a number of species of oil, tar sands, for example, and fracked shale oil in America. Solar is better on energy payback. Of course, there's no free lunch in energy. You always have to get your payback. But that's the case. And then, if I understood it correctly, Bill, you argued that governments know this, and this is why the investment's coming down, because they're aware of the ludicrous energy payback cost that we have. No, that's not true either. The problems we have with some of the subsidy regimes, and let's be really clear, fossil fuels get far more subsidies than renewables, far more. And there are any number of studies that show this. So the reason why we have trouble from time to time is because there is a very powerful incumbency, the strongest set of vested interests that the world has arguably ever seen, who are trying to torpedo us all the time so that the successes that Francesco and Torhild have talked about have been achieved in the face of strong enemy action, taking multiple forms. I'll just give you one example to illustrate how acute this is. And this comes from Britain. You know, we have a climate change law, and the government says in public that it is buying into all these targets. What does it do for fossil fuels, and does it do for renewables? Well, it supports offshore wind. That's true. But for solar, they've withdrawn all the subsidies, knowing that a little industry they created when they started with the feed-in tariffs will be destroyed with the loss of tens of thousands of jobs in the UK. And they've done this to favour nuclear and shale. And we're told this by people inside the wire, in government. I'm told it by people up to the level of ministers. Tell me this is what's going on. 2 examples. If you live in a community that has shale fracking in the UK, you will be paid thousands of pounds straight into your bank account as a bribe to accept the fracking. What do we get in contrast? In the solar industry, the government intends to stop paying even for unsubsidized export of solar electricity from solar roofs, from prosumers. Can you believe it? This is the truth. And the reason they do it is because the government listens to the incumbency. My company is the biggest UK renewables company in terms of overseas sales, if you believe the Sunday Times league table and these things. How many times have we been in to see the government, or have they come to visit us? Precisely 0, despite invitations. So we're facing an incredibly strong enemy that is really good at deploying disinformation. And Bill, you deployed 3 pieces of disinformation of the kind that they throw against us in your remarks.
Hold on, before you get started. Just because I have to warn you, we are really at the end of the day, and this is going to be the last comment. So no matter this beautiful, rich discussion that's going to take place, you're going to miss most of it. So Bill, feel free to complete the discussion, and then we'll say goodbye.
I'm not here to defend fossil fuel, and I think you slightly misrepresented some of my comments. I will, well, more than slightly. The question remains, and this is the thing I started with and I want to leave with. Can we reduce the use of fossil fuels by 50% in 12 years and still maintain the stability trajectory that we're on? That's all. And I suspect it's going to be a much bigger challenge than we've been able to talk about here this evening.
So I really would like to thank all of you who joined this final panel, but I also want to thank all the panelists today and the arc of conversation and all of you who have contributed. I apologize to those of you whose questions we didn't get to. And to sort of take note that we are ending right back where we started, but we're richer in our thoughts than we were this morning. I'm thinking right now about Ugo Bardi's discussion of the Seneca effect and the recognition that if you go too fast, you fall faster. So back to that double bind of how we can both live in the world that we're in today and make the kind of radical changes that we need to make. Will we reach collapse because we change too fast, or will we collapse because we change too slow? And how do we find that perfect balance that Ernst talked about to bring it and ourselves and each other to a new way of living? There's a lot of work to do, and that's okay. Let's do it. Thank you.
The point I didn't get to make in my introductory remarks dealt with the question you're talking about of the entrenched interests blocking any kind of reasonable movement forward.
There's some announcements. And
there's more than an announcement. There's closing
statements, and there's all sorts of things.
Okay. So, first of all, you all get the award for bravery. Every single one that has stayed with us over the last 2 days, can I applaud you for listening, for participating, for being with us as we've moved through this very important celebration of the Club of Rome. Now, there are some others that we would like to applaud. I will give the closing remarks, but I would quickly like to, first of all, welcome Roberto, because we've heard a lot about Aurelio Pace, but we haven't yet really heard from his son or the rest of his family that have been here and, as I indicated before, traveled from all over the world to participate in this celebration.
Well, thank you very much, Sandrine. I mostly want to thank people for what happened here. This would have never happened if it wasn't for our sponsors, Parilla, Bulgari, Coop, Enel, and Sofidel, in particular for our biggest sponsors, which is Novamont, WWF, Aurelio Pace Foundation, and ASVIS. So without that, we wouldn't be here. And without your enthusiasm, this would have been something entirely different. It's really a pleasure for me to see that the same crazy ideas are still going on. Very good. Keep making noises. Keep pushing the boundaries. Don't hesitate to speak out. Speak to the truth. Thank you. I did forget one person. My partner in crime in this was Gianfranco Bologna from WWF. He was back there. Thank you, Gianfranco.
Okay, so I won't keep you for much longer, but I wanted to give Roberto a chance to thank all the incredible people that have been part of this summit. When I arrived here in Rome on, gosh, I can't remember now, on Monday morning for some of our own strategy sessions, it didn't even occur to me that I would be addressing you here today. Myself and Raffaele, since our arrival, were then sworn in as the new co-presidents of the Club of Rome. And to be frank, it has been an incredible 2 days for us, an incredible journey, where we ourselves have taken on a responsibility of ensuring to all of you that we will try to be the best leaders that we can be, but also to remind all of you that leadership is about both a following and ensuring that there are more leaders along the way. So don't throw it all on us. And I wanted to remind you that, again, it can't be all on us, because already we're leaving this room now with 10 actions. So I announced 6, and they're huge. We already have a relationship that's developing with the Italian government around education. We have a continued relationship with the city of Rome, where the mayor has embraced us and indicated that she would like to work with us. And a lot of this is, again, thanks to all the organizers and the funders and the partners who have made this possible. We have a series of other relationships that we're now developing with faith groups, which I announced, as well as media groups, which I also announced. And then we have our own themes, which we're going to carry out and try to actually, with these different groups, ensure that we look at the conversations that we've had in the last 2 days and make them concrete and make them solutions-based and make them real and make them impactful. We have offers of funding, because to be frank, the Club of Rome, most of us, in fact all of us, are pretty much unpaid. We come because we believe in the Club of Rome. The Secretariat, however, needs to function to organize us, and that's absolutely fundamental. So what are those other actions that I promised you? Well, one of the most beautiful actions actually was developed yesterday when I asked for a call to action from the youth. And I was honored enough to be able to spend a bit of time with them in a bar not far from the Vatican, where I thought a few students would follow me and we'd go and have a couple of drinks. We ended up overflowing out of a bar, being between 30 and 40 people, wanting to discuss the role and the possibility of the youth. And several people came up to me and I said, okay, I want you to self-organize, come up with an idea by today, and if it's good enough, and if we've looked at it and think it is possible, then why not announce it? So here it is, guys. Here's the offer that we've received from some of the youth in here, and they're still actually contemplating a bigger offer around a pledge that they're really ready to give. But the beauty of this offer is that they're not asking necessarily to be members of the Club of Rome. They just want to be empowered to be able to go out and speak to the rest of the world about how what we're saying resonates with them and is important to their generation. There's no ego here. And if I can remind you of one of the first things that I said when I welcomed you in, I said, please leave your ego out there and come in here with your heart. And the beauty of this statement is exactly this. And not only do they say they're ready to do everything they possibly can to maximize the impact, to work with the Club of Rome, to use social media, to speak across the globe to all the issues that we've just talked about, they finish by saying, and by the way, if you've already thought about this, that's okay, we're happy to join whatever you have. Not me, myself, and I have the option. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a 21st century Club of Rome. After that incredible experience and the reading of this letter, I walked outside and I had a photo opportunity with the incredible family of Aurelio Pace, and I started to talk to one of the grandsons, and we have agreed to work together because, again, Aurelio Pace's family have lived the history. They live and breathe and want to be part of this new vision. And so we are going to work together to carry that vision because they want to work with us on specific projects. And remember, they're all over the world. And they've brought forward, again, one of their fathers who they've been working with, who's come from Argentina, who actually has started a peace alliance and who I've just spoken to about ensuring that we work with the Vatican and that we work with other faith groups to ensure that we maximize the opportunity now to talk about peace and love, not hate, so that we can ensure that the systems that are totally dysfunctional, which are more technical in some ways, the energy system, all of this has to be done. But for the moment, and I think all of us as leaders, every single person on this panel who I know personally, and in particular Enrico and Torhild and Jeremy, who I know even more, they might get accused for not going fast enough because they're part of the energy business. But I can tell you that some of the things that these people have done, the risks that they've taken, the way in which they've communicated to their peers have gone way beyond what many of us would have imagined 5 years ago. They are visionaries, and we need to work with them and push them and provoke them. But we also have to understand the pressures that they're under. And that also is the 21st century Club of Rome, ensuring that we work through some of those difficult conversations, not talk to ourselves, not create silos, not create echo chambers. Work with those that you're not used to working with in order to create that trust and that love and that confidence to work together in this very complex environment. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is how I would like to end. And sometimes I like to end in a little bit of a different way, so here's my attempt. I've decided to come up with a few invigorating phrases around the word love. So here it goes. It might sound a bit silly, and in fact, Herbie and I were kind of trying to find some words for V, which is not easy. I'd like to leverage individual and collective thought leadership. I'd like to open people's minds and hearts as the Club of Rome. We'd like to be the vector for value-based action and ensure individual and collective change. Because we don't have time, and I'll leave you with this. Love is anterior to life, posterior to death, initial of creation, and the exponent of breath. Emily Dickinson, who probably didn't think that in addition to loving each other, our biggest responsibility is to love nature. And remember that that is the gift, not us. So thank you very much. Incredibly inspirational conversations. And we look forward to working with you to ensure that what we've heard about today, even though there are some very dire situations, we can work together to transform those challenges into opportunities in the renaissance that we all want to see and was started here in Rome and other cities across Italy. Thank you very much.
Oh.